Hello everyone. It's been a while since I recorded anything. I've been busy trying to sort of build up content for like a new training, and then I'm just sort of confused and all over the place. But I kind of figured I'm going to make like intro videos to every render engine that I have access to. Okay, so I have access to 5 render engines, which is Mantra, Vray, Arnold, Octane, and 3D Elite. So I'm going to make an intro video for all of them and release like one every 2 days. Okay. I'm also waiting for Renderman 24. So once Renderman 24 comes out, I'll probably do one for that. I sadly don't have access to Redshift anymore. My license has expired for that. Okay, but yeah, those 5 I'm going to do. So I'm going to start with Vray, and then whichever is the next one is going to be the next one. Okay, so I'm going to cover the same topics for all of them. And then once we've done the intros, I'll start to go into more specifics. So we'll look at materials and we'll look at volumes and, more specific things. Okay, so what we're going to cover is, this is specific to Vray, but in general, we'll go through the same things. So we'll take a look at how to install it and then how to set it up for Houdini. And then setting up the basic renderer, the basic light settings, the Vray frame buffer, which has quite a few parameters, the Vray light mixer, and then look at more specific things like attributes and instancing and particles. Okay, actually not particles, more like point rendering. So those are the general topics that I am going to cover. Okay, so to get started, once you've got Vray and like you've purchased it and everything, what you need to do first of all is write an email to the chaos group support and get access to the nightly builds. Okay, so this is sort of like the production build that you get or the daily build. Okay, and then once you have access to the nightly build, they'll give you, there's a website called nightlies.chaosgroup.com. Okay, and once you get there, there'll be a folder called Vray 5 for Houdini Nightlies. And in the topmost folder, you will find the latest production build that is available. Okay, so this is 18.5.596. Okay, so this is the one that you need to download. And or you can download the installer. The first time you install it, download the installer. Okay, because it will also install the license server. Okay, so once you've done that, then go to the in the documents you'll have 18.5. The 18.5 folder, and you'll find a folder in there called packages. So in there you need to create a Vray JSON file, and this is what hold on, let me open that, and this is what you type in there. So I'm going to attach this because this is too much to type. It doesn't make any sense to try and remember all of this. But what you need to change is every time you install a new version, or you just copy paste a new version, you just want to change this path, okay, to wherever it is installed. Like that's pretty much it. So once you've copy pasted this into your packages folder, it should pretty much work. It's a little bit of work, but yeah, it's pretty much just that. All right, so once you've installed it, you will get a Vray shelf on top, which you can open from here. If you click plus, you'll come to shelves and you'll get like a Vray shelf. And so I have this model which I downloaded from like when it used to be algorithmic. So Substance had like a online competition or something, and they made this model available. So I'm just using this one, but you can use any model that you want. It's not like particularly important. Okay, so what I have is I have like a couple of things. I have a base that I had made, and I have this model. And then I also have like a basic instancing setup, which I'll go into. And then I have a simple particle setup, or actually I've just scattered some points. So once we come into, rendering points and doing instancing, it'll just be easier for me to go through it. Okay, and I have a camera. So that's pretty much it. Okay, so to get started, we'll create a ROP network and we'll just type in Vray. And you'll get a bunch of things. I'm not going through all of them. So just click Vray renderer and it'll add 2 things. It'll add the basic renderer and it'll add the IPR. And that's pretty much it. You don't really need to do too much with this. The default settings are actually pretty decent. Okay, so you generally don't need to go in and modify it. I also won't go into the settings because Vray is massive, right? Like most of the Vray is probably the biggest render engine that I have ever used. Like I used to use it a lot. I used it for about 12 years when I was using Macs. And now I'm sort of, back into it. But yeah, Vray was always huge. So it has like a ton of stuff. Like this is your sampler, and then you have global illumination and, color mapping, which is for clamping like bright areas and stuff, and then camera settings, and then you get like a ton of options for like geometry, lights, materials, everything. These are like global options. And then for caustics and IPR settings, and then distributed rendering. So it's got like a ton of stuff, but you don't need to do, too much, like at the basic level. Like later on, we'll go through this and, I'll try and explain as much as I can, but at a basic level, you don't need to modify too much. Okay, so we'll keep this, and then let's add a couple of lights. Okay, so you have lights on top over here. So you have like a direct light, IES. We'll take a rectangle light. So we're just going to go through two of them. I'll go through the rectangle light and the dome light. Okay, so let's take the rectangle light, and we can just click, and there you go. So you have a standard area light added in there, and I can just zoom out a bit, and we'll place it somewhere. Okay, and then I can just come into the shelf, and the third button, it says IPR, and you can just click on that. And it should give you like a default rendering. So this is the Vray frame buffer. Don't use the Houdini render view for this. I don't even know if it shows up in the Houdini render view. Let me just try that. And let's go into, let me go new floating panel, render view. Yeah, it does show up, but then the Vray frame buffer, has like a lot more options. Okay, so this is your basic stuff. Now what we'll also do is I'll just add a couple of materials to this so that you have a little more things to do. So I'll take a material network and type in builder, because if you type in Vray, you'll get like, far too many things. So just type in builder, and you'll get something called as Vray material builder. And what is great about the Vray material builder is that it already has like a material inside. Most of the other material builders that you get, like if you take the 3D E-Light material builder, there's nothing in there. So you have to make one. Like it's an additional step. So what the Vray guys have done is that they've just, already made one inside. So it makes life a little bit simpler. Okay, so I'll just call this base, and I'll create another one. We'll call this model. So I'll assign this here, and I'll assign that there. Okay. And let's turn on the IPR. Yeah, there you go. So let me just go into the material. I'll give it some reflection. So I'll come into the model, and I'll make it slightly brighter. And I'll come into reflection, and what you need to do is take the color and just make it white. So you'll get, reflections. And also, if you want to increase the reflectivity, turn off lock Fresnel IOR. Okay, because default it is connected to the refraction IOR. So just turn that off, and then we can just increase this. Yeah, so there you go. It's a little more reflective. So now we can, I'll close this temporarily. Just, like drag it, it'll shut down. Okay, so we'll just take a look at the light parameters. You have some basic things like, let me just zoom out a bit so I can see the light as well. So we have this. You can decide the width and the height of the light. You can define the directionality of it, which is nice. Okay, so if you want it to be more like a spotlight, you can do that. When you increase the directionality, the light kind of gets concentrated, so the intensity increases. Okay, so you should just be aware of that. Okay, and then you have some basic options, like you can make it invisible. Okay, you can turn it into a disk. And you can do no decay, so there's no decay. You have intensity. You have different units for it. So I guess if you're doing something more precise, you can go to lumen, so you can go to watt. But you can keep it to default for standard work. And you can define a color. So this is pretty straightforward. Okay, and then if you come further down, then you have other options, like you can probably define like a shadow color, okay, it's useful for doing more dramatic or more stylized stuff. And then if you come to advanced, you have options like you can affect diffuse or you can affect specular. You also have a slider, so you can control the amount. So you have options for like caustics and caustic subdivisions and those things. But yeah, like you have a fair bit of control over this. Now another thing you can do is you can also take a texture. Okay, so I have some sort of light textures that I got from like a DAZ library that I had purchased. So I'll just try to load those. Okay, so I have like, if I say show images, yeah, I have these nice little ones. So I can just hit accept, and there you go. So you can emit light based on that. And depending upon like if you're working with standard color space or you're working in like ACIS, like OCIO, then you can change the color space from linear to sRGB. sRGB will make it brighter. Well, of course, we're not working in OCIO at the moment, so it'll be like all over the place. But then you can try to change it to something like watts, and that will bring down the intensity, and then you can get a little more control on it. But yeah, or I can just keep it to linear, and that will be fine as well. Okay. And if you want, you can multiply it with color. So whatever color you give here is like what it will sort of use. Okay. And then let's try this one. I think this is interesting. Yeah, there you go. That looks nice. Okay. Yeah, and let's make the light invisible. Okay, so there you go. So this is basic, as far as light settings are concerned. So now let's add like a dome light. So I can come in here and I can click light dome. Okay. And so there you go. So you have a dome light. And if you zoom out, like default, it is a hemisphere. Okay, so if you select the dome light, you have an option in there to turn it spherical. And that is required sometimes, because if you take a texture, like let's say if I pick up, my standard one, there you go. Okay, so you'll notice like it's, it doesn't have a ground over there, like it's just black. So then if I turn on the light and make it like dome spherical, see, then it's fine. So yeah, so you can just rotate it. This is fairly simple stuff. I'll turn off the light, the area light temporarily. Yeah, okay. So I can let's make this 0. Again, I'm not working in ACIS space at the moment, but if you just want to sort of, make it a little brighter, you can try changing it to sRGB, which makes it brighter. Okay, or actually like improves the gamma a little bit, so you can get it to be a little more, high contrast, which works nicely for, lighting overall. Yeah, so the rest of it is pretty much the same, like, like doing diffuse contribution or doing like specular contribution. Like if I make the specular contribution 0, then you won't get any specular on it at all. So that stuff remains the same. So I'll just turn on this light as well. And let's make this back to 0. So it's coming in from the other side. Yeah, okay. That looks nice. Okay, this is as far as, like basic light setup is concerned. Let's also just go through the basic material setup. Like nothing too fancy. I'm not going to go through all of them. We'll just take a look at, you have your standard diffuse, reflection and refraction. So we'll just go through like those three. So I'll just make the reflection back to 0. So you can do your basic like diffuse color, and you can give it roughness if you want. So if you want to do more like cloth, you can do that. It can be gamma based, or it can be like Oren-Nair. You have like two different shaders, like shading types. Okay, you can give it self illumination, which also will start emitting light. So because it has this option here which says self illumination affects GI. If that is off, then nothing happens. So it just glows and there's no light coming out. But if you turn this on, then it sort of gives out light. Okay, then you can give it reflection. So I can make it like white over here. See, so that gives it reflection. You have like originally Vray used to use something called glossiness. Nowadays we tend to use roughness. Now the difference is they go in opposite directions. So in roughness, 0 is shiny and 1 is blurred out. And then in glossiness, 1 is shiny and 0 is like blurred out. So what you can do is you can come into options and you can say reflection glossiness, use roughness. Okay, so then this will work like roughness. Okay, see, so now this is more like standard to what you're now used to. Okay, and then you can define like the IOR value, what you want. Or you can just go into metalness, which is also fine. Okay, and if you want to do glass, it's fairly simple. Let me just lower the roughness here. Come into refraction and I can make it 1. And there you go, you get glass. Okay, and then you can define like a color for the glass if you want. Okay, or you can also give it like fog color, which is absorption. Okay, so if I take this and let's say if I make it red, and then we can define like the fog multiplier. See, so if I like lower that, there you go. Or let's make it like green or blue or something. Yeah, so you can define the multiply value. Multiply value is based on the size of the object. So the larger the object is, the more fog multiplier you'll need. And then you can define like a bias for it. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward that way. Okay, so I'll turn this off and we'll go back to something standard. Okay, I'm just going to take the light dome and bring it back to like linear because this is getting a little too bright. Yeah, I think this is fine. And let's make this around 30. Okay, now let's just quickly take a look at the options in the Vray frame buffer. For some reason, my history isn't working. Okay, like you suppose when you do a final render, it allows you to store the images over here. But for some reason, my history settings isn't working. Okay, but let's just take a look at the rest of the stuff. Okay, so primarily, like you have some basic options here, like you can do region rendering, so this is nice. So I think if I start to rotate this around, see that you can do a region render. You can tell it to follow the mouse when you are doing like bucket rendering. This is like this can stop the render. This is for IPR and this is for final render. Okay, and then you can save the image from here. Now along with that, the other interesting stuff you get is you get color correction. So instead of having like a single color correction area, it actually has like a Photoshop like stack. Okay, so you have your basic source image and then you can turn on the denoiser and you can add some lens effects if you want. And then let's say if I want to add some basic things, like I can add a color balance, because I can do like some basic color balance to this. Okay. Or if I want to add curves, so I can do curves. See. Or let's do hue saturation. So maybe I want to like reduce the saturation a little bit and maybe, So yeah, so this is pretty nice. Like you can do a lot of things with this. Okay, now one of the other interesting things you can do is you have something called as a light mix. Okay, but that doesn't work, standard. So what you need to do is you need to add a render element called a light mix. Okay, so what you want to do is stop this. We'll come into the ROP network and type in Vray and take Vray render elements. Jump in and type in light. So you'll get something called Vray light mix and just connect that. Okay, and then come into Vray images and you'll have something called as use render elements. So just take this and drag and drop it here. Now what you need to do is the light mixer doesn't work in IPR mode. You have to do a final render. So just come in here and you can click render and it'll render it for you. And you can see like the source down here has now changed to light mix. Okay, so instead of like you can go to RGB, but now you have like a light mix. And what you can do is like if we turn off all, see it just turns off everything. You can turn off the dome light, you can turn off the primary light, you can, up or lower the intensity. You can, modify the color of it if you want. like let's take this, we'll make it, I don't know, green. Yeah, so you can sort of do, this. So it's pretty simple. You just have to have like a render element and add a light mixer in there. Like that's pretty much it. The rest it takes care of on its own. Okay, so, and then this is your standard render. Okay, so now that we've done this much, let's take a look at, some of the basic Houdini things, right? So first we'll take a look at how to render attributes, and then we'll look at instancing, and finally we'll look at rendering points. All right, so Houdini crashed. So I'm back to, well, I hadn't done anything too complicated, so I just rebuilt the basic scene. Okay, so we're here. What we're going to take a look at now is attributes. All right. So what we're going to do is I'll just come into the model, and let me just go back to standard, and I'll just in the lab tools you have something called as measure curvature. So we'll just measure curvature, and what I'll do is I'm just going to take like the range and increase the intensity, maybe blur it. No. Okay. And then the same thing here. Let me just like make this 0. Let's get this to around like 20. Okay, this is fine. I'll turn off visualize as color, and you don't really need to do too much. Okay, like you can add Vray object properties, but it should pretty much work without that as well. So you just have like down here in the shelf, you'll have something called object properties. So it'll add like Vray object properties, and you have like a bunch of options in there. Like you can do visibility stuff. So primary visibility, reflections, refractions, stuff like that. And in the main, you have something called as user attributes. I'll just put in a star in there. It'll just pick up everything. And what we'll do is I'll come into the material network, and I'll create, I'll just copy paste. So I'll do Control C, Control V, and let's call this as attributes. And let's assign that here. So we'll just open up the IPR. And the way it works is fairly simple. Type in the word user, and you'll get user color float integer. Okay, so what we want right now is generated two attributes called concavity and convexity. Okay, so if you press I here, so you'll get like concavity and convexity. These are both float values. So just come in here, and I can type in user float, and I can type in concavity, and I'll make another one, and I'll call it convexity. Okay, and if you've done everything right, if I just plug this into diffuse, it should work when we hit a re-render. There you go. It doesn't show up immediately. You have to hit a re-render. So I can just plug that out, and then let's plug this in, press play, and there you go. So you have the concave values and the convex values. Okay, so let's do something fancy with this. So what I'll do is, let's say we want to control the metalness. So I'll take a gradient ramp. So you'll get a gradient ramp, and let's set this up. So I'll just take the concavity, I'll connect it to gradient input, and change the setting type from 4 corner to position. Okay, and then plug this in. So there you go. So you'll get that. And let's say this is for color. So I'll make this, let's say these areas I want yellow. Okay, and the rest of it I want like a light gray. And then I want the yellow areas to be like metallic. So what I can do is, let's just take this and we'll squeeze this in. Yeah. And then I can do Control C, Control V. And let's try to change this to, this will all be metallic, and then this will be diffuse. So let's take that, we'll take the intensity and connect it to the metalness. So there you go. So you have metalness, and there you go. So you have metal. And then I'll just make it slightly rough. So we can do that as well, so I can just, let's call this metalness. And let's do, like, I'll close this. Let's do Control C, Control V, and we'll call this roughness. Again, we'll pick up intensity and connect it to reflect glossiness. And let's just flip this. Or let's try something. Let's make this. Okay, so one of the reasons the roughness is not working is because the color is black. So make sure that this color is white, only then the roughness starts to work. See, so now it's working. So I want this to also be like a little bit, this should be more, this should be less rough. Okay, and then let's say I want to add these two together. Okay, like the concavity and convexity, I want to add them both together. So what I can do is, like, I'll right click here, come to Vray utility, and you'll find something called as float operations. So click float operations, and we can plug in like the first and second, and what we want is we want the sum. So replace all three of them with the sum, because we want to add them together. There you go. So you can create, like, some nice decent fancy material based on attributes. Sorry, the camera is not locked, but there you go. Okay, so if I come back here, let me just save this, if it decides to crash again. Like, let's say if we come back to the model and I make some changes to this, or hold on, like, let's adjust that guy. Yeah, there you go. See, so you can, control it. Like, I can blur it out. So there you go. So you can kind of, build materials based on attributes. Now let's take a look at instancing. So instancing is pretty simple, right? Like, it supports backed primitives, so you don't need to do anything, right? So if I just come into instancing, all I have here is I have the same model. I did like a scatter and align, and I gave it, I did a copy to points, and it just says pack an instance. Like, that's it. You don't need to do anything more than that. I'll just make a small change here. I want like a little bit of difference in the size. Yeah, I think this is cool. Okay, and then the rest is the same. I'll make a new material, and we'll call it instance. And let's do the same thing. We'll take a user. This time we'll take a color, and it's CD, like they've done that for you. So you can just plug in the color, and I can just take the material and drag and drop here. And what you want to do is add the Vray properties, the object properties, and make sure you turn on the Ray server instancer. That's pretty much it. So now if we turn on the IPR, it'll work. There you go. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. You don't need to do anything. And then the last thing is we'll take a look at particles, which is also very straightforward. You don't need to do anything at all with this. Okay, I can just, I'll assign the same material. Okay, so I'll just select the particles and assign the same material for instance, because it's going to just pick up the color value again. If you hit IPR, it'll more or less just work. There you go. It just renders particles. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Like, you don't need to do too much. So if I come in here and if I change these colors, this I had just done for like visual purposes. But let's say if I take the random value and change it, yeah, it changes. Or like, let's say if I change from random to noise, there you go. Okay, and let's say even the P scale, I'm doing a multiply. Let's put that to noise as well. I can do like big and small. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. Like, you don't need to do too much with this. And I can try to like offset this a little bit. Okay, so as a final thing, let's just turn on the GPU render, because it has GPU rendering as well. Okay, so I can just come into the ROPNet and right in the beginning in the export tab, you'll have a mode. So the default mode is CPU. I can change it to either CUDA or RTX. Okay, so CUDA is for like all the cards, but primarily like if you don't have an RTX card. Okay, so if you have like anything prior to a 2060, because 2060 and above are RTX. Okay, so you can change it to CUDA, and then the interesting about the CUDA GPU devices is that you can use like, you can even use your CPU as a CUDA device. Okay, so I can apply that, and then if you want to go to RTX, because I have a 2080 Ti, so I'll just turn that on. Okay, so we can just turn that on and hit IPR, and there you go. So now you're doing GPU rendering. Or if you want to go over to RTX, you can switch over to RTX, and that's the same. The first time you ever render it, it will compile a little. Like if you turn on the log window, like this last button in the bottom right corner, you will see it. Like if it doesn't start off immediately, open up the log window, you'll see that it is building the optics kernel or the CUDA kernel for the graphics card. Once it's done, then it will start rendering. Okay, but it just does it once, like the first time you ever hit render. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Like it's quite like feature parity between CPU GPU is almost complete now. I think you don't need to do too much. Okay. All right. So as the final thing, let's take a look at the depth of field options. Okay, and what you get is something really nice called as a Vray physical camera. So what we'll do is I'll create a new camera and I'll set it to 640/480 and just click on physical camera. So what it will do is it will add like physical camera properties, and what that also does is it gives you this option called physical exposure, but you can disable that if you don't want it. So if you turn on IPR now, you'll get the physical camera options. Like if you switch on physical exposure, you'll see like it works on the ISO value, but what it also does is it works on the f-stop. So if you lower the f-stop, it will get brighter. So it's very like physically accurate. But what you can do is for now, I can disable this, and I can come to depth of field and turn this on, and you can then define from the sampling tab, you can define the f-stop and the focus distance. So let's just zoom in a little, and I can just try to lower the focus distance till I get something in focus. Yeah, there you go. Let's make it 0.6. Yeah, and let's try one final thing. I'll come into the base and I'll make it dark so I can just see this. There you go. So we can come in here, I can enable this. You can define number of blades and stuff like that. You can also have like a custom aperture if you want. Let's get it really low just for fun. So I can come into the sampling and let's make it 0.1. Yeah, there you go. So it's like really out of focus. But there you go. Like that's pretty much it. Okay, so this is, these are all the basics of using Vray. Okay, like there is a lot more, but this is as far as just getting you started. So instancing, attributes, basic material settings, basic light settings, and the basic render engine, and the Vray frame buffer settings. So the next lesson for Vray, I'll take a look at all the various material settings and what all you can do. And then we'll do volumes. So I'll follow that for every render engine that I'm going to cover. Okay. So I don't know which is the next one. I think I'll probably do 3D Elite because that's free. So you can take a look at that. Okay. But yeah, I'll cover all of them. Okay, because I don't know what else to do.